This is Ouija Boards and Midnight Marks, where a spirit board conversation sparked our spiritual evolution. I'm Shale.
And I'm Cheyenne. And each week we explore a world where there is much more than meets the eye. So pour yourself a drink and join us as we cheers to a witchin' good time.
Okay.
Welcome back, witches. Merry Yuletide. Blessed solstice.
Yay!
Wild. This year went by quickly. How are
It
we
did.
feeling tonight? How are we feeling tonight? What are you drinking? Maybe we just go straight to what are you drinking?
Because we don't want to talk about what's going on in the world. I needed a little cup of cozy tonight. And because it's a Yule themed one, it just makes sense to have hot chocolate. Everybody probably listens to these episodes and they're like, Shale, just fucking tell her what you're drinking and shut up.
No, the lead up is the best part.
I
At least
agree.
we have fun housekeeping. Like, what are you drinking while we talk to each other over the internet instead of
Yeah.
like, come to our meeting on this day whenever?
100%. But we do have housekeeping, so don't let me forget about that by the end of this episode. I am drinking a hot cup of cacao. And it has reishi, eleuthero, and burdock root in it today, which all just feel like those yum, wintry, adaptogenic herbs that we need right now to get through the dark days ahead, metaphorically speaking.
Ahead. And probably physically too. Let's be
Right.
real. This sounds delicious. I'm also drinking hot chocolate.
Shut up. Is this the first time we've both made the same thing ever?
Same thing ever. I have maple mini marshmallows on top of mine,
Oh, I didn't show you my mug. It's got mushrooms.
and it's so hot and spicy.
Yes, in more ways than one. If you're just listening to this episode today, you're not watching the YouTube video, you're probably not getting our innuendos, but it says Hex the Patriarchy on Cheyenne's mug.
I also may or may not have hit a Benjamin behind it, but Shale missed it.
Also, I'm really distracted by Telly getting in the tree right now. and
I
it's adorable.
apologize for the cats. Let's do some cat housekeeping. Really
Yes, you got to
quickly.
introduce the newest member of the family.
We have a new coven member.
Look at her.
Her name is Matilda.
She's such a sweet little angel baby. Look at her.
She's a tiny little tuxedo.
Oh,
And we adopted her in November, in early November, in crisis. And she is holding my mental health together.
nothing makes the sting of a ridiculous election feel better, like a little kitten.
Yes, kitten love is important. So just an early housekeeping check-in with everybody to take care of yourselves this holiday season. I know things are probably weird and messy, and you might be having uncomfortable holidays, and I hope you're not. I hope you've been able to set really clear and aligned boundaries for yourself with who deserves space in your life and who does not. But yeah, if your holidays are feeling a little less holiday-y, some things that have been helping me feel better are adopting a kitten, saving a life. You're welcome.
Saving a life.
And then, you know, finding ways in my own local community here, mutual aid wise, to actually check in on the ground with people who are doing stuff. Telluride, you're about to get kicked out of the meeting, the family meeting, if you can't stop climbing the
I
tree.
love the ambiance of like, I'm doing things in my community and you're about to get kicked out if you don't get your shit together, cat.
I'm gatekeeping the cat from the podcast. It would be Telluride being the cat climbing the Christmas tree instead of the
It's on
newborn baby
brand.
kitten. But it's fine.
On brand.
Don't freaking hiss. Stop it.
And also, I would add that if you are feeling like you need a little bit more community right now, you can always reach out to us. That is the idea behind the OBMM Coven. We do read our DMs. We're not big enough that we get a million of them and can't manage them. So now is the time if you want to be best friends with
Now
us.
while we're accessible.
Right. One day we'll be famous. Sorry, that will happen. But until then, line right up and be our friends.
Get in
the
now.
DMs.
If you get in the OG OBMM coven, you will maintain that relationship when we are at superstar status. So
For sure.
that also gives you access to really fun places like our monthly working challenge, which we will put info in the show notes for you to find how we do that. Same with our book coven. We meet once a month. There are lots of people gathering in really lovely community spaces to hold each other and do some important work. So there will be
Absolutely.
a boatload of links in the show notes to help direct you if you are feeling directionless.
Exactly. And one last piece of housekeeping with the sister side of OBMM, because Cheyenne and I also have our individual endeavors, of course. And most of you are familiar with Tova, but this month, finally, I will have launched products by the time this episode comes out. You will hold me to it. And I have a whole line of tinctures and teas that are going to be available just in time for the holiday season. And also in November, I have launched the herb. What am I calling it? I'm having a brain fart.
What
Not that
are you calling it?
I gave it a different name. Hold on. I need to look up my own shit really quick. We're obviously editing this out.
Podcast break. The audio version of this might be different than the video version. You don't know.
Oh, in November, I will have launched also the Herbal Wisdom Coven. So if you want to get more connected to building a relationship with plants on a spiritual level, and building your repertoire of herbal knowledge, this is a monthly gathering that I'm going to do on the first Thursday of every month, so it doesn't conflict with our other monthly workings or the OBMM Coven book club or any of the other things we have going on. So you'll be able to join. And there's multiple ways to access it, whether you want to just join for the meditation. There'll also always be a workshop afterward where we can learn more about how to work with the plant of the month. And there's also options on higher level tiers if you would like to have plant material given to you by me from my home apothecary. So I hope you join. So do it. Actually, I'll let Cheyenne be aggressive because I just really want you guys to hang out. So
Yeah, please come. Please join us. It's lovely. I am Shale's scary dog privilege tonight.
yeah,
Show up.
absolutely. Cheyenne's always got my back. So lots of amazing ways for you to join in the OBMM community. And we are excited to have you all here.
Yeah, welcome. Well, let's pick a card before we dive into today's topic, which I'm so excited for. We are drawing from our Seasons of the Witch Samhain Oracle. This is the first time that we've pulled with this deck on the
Oh, this deck is so beautiful.
But you have seen it on our Instagram if you follow us there. This was gifted to us by the lovely Mandy.
Love you, Mandy. Shout out, Mandy. You are a real one.
Mandy is a real one.
Also, look at like sorry, keep raving Mandy
No,
and then
sorry, just Mandy got me a ladder in Animal Crossing before I was far enough in the game to build a ladder. And it like
that's so wholesome.
It did something for me.
That's a real friend.
Yeah, she's part of us, one of us. But I think, this Sound Oracle is gonna come with us this season. I think we are just there she is.
She's already a jumper.
Yes, I think
I was just gonna say like the edge of it because it has the red foil looks like Christmassy. It's perfect. Perfect time for the debut.
Yes. So I just feel like Oracle card energy is nice for the Yuletide going into a Gregorian New Year barf. Check back in on your Samhain goals, especially in light of global affairs. How can you realign? How can you continue taking care of yourself and your people while, fighting fascism? Yay. Okay. So
just that little slight nugget.
The card we have drawn today is Haunted.
Ooh. Is it the woman with the yellow ribbon?
Oh, with the green ribbon around? No, it looks like her.
That's a very good obscure Halloween costume if you're ever needing one, by the way. And only the real cool kids will get it.
You are not a traumatized youth in the, late 90s. And it's fine. Don't worry about it. Anyway, Haunted. Here's our lovely gal. She's sitting in a chair. There are hands coming out of like cracks in the walls, almost root-like around her, four hands reaching out. Yeah, very muted. She's, I believe, crying. Looks like she's crying.
She might be crying. We're not sure.
She's either crying or she just hasn't used her facial roller in a couple of days. Either way, girl, same, not judging. Zoom is making these look a lot better than they do in real life. So let's find her. Haunted. She's on page 21. What I love about this
Come
deck
on, come
is that
on,
they
don't
actually
leave
tell
me
you
like this.
where to find her.
Something, something, I'm haunted.
I love
Is
it.
it Speak Now? My Swifty's coming out.
I think so, yes.
Or is it
Crystal will let
Speak
us
Now?
know
Yeah.
if we fucked that up.
She'll shame me.
So
She'll be
our
like, Shale, you should
keyword.
know better.
This is the other fun part about us being on video, is that we're not as tight on our audio tangents as we used to be. I love it. Haunted, keywords, atonement, and company. The breaking of the floor beneath your naked feet. The creaking of the walls as the cold kisses flesh. You're never really alone when the company of hauntings within bone.
Interesting.
Okay, we're going to turn the page and read more. The definition of a poltergeist is an unknown spirit that causes disturbances such as loud noise or moving furniture. In fact, the word for poltergeist means noisy spirit. It's a German word.
Those are like
Originally,
poltergeist.
Bro.
You have to like emphasize it.
poltergeist. And my eyeballs can't find the words. Originally, poltergeists were thought to be demons who played tricks, focusing their attention on one specific person. However, theories surrounding the origins of poltergeist disturbances have changed. Many believe poltergeists to be a manifestation of an individual's troubled psyche. I'm looking at you because we talked about something like this earlier. But
I know. I was just thinking,
doesn't
like,
need
this
to
has a lot
know
of
that.
synonyms.
Wild. Okay. This person is usually in some kind of pain or trauma, either from things done to them or things they've done to others. The poltergeist becomes a physical representation of the pain that has been locked away and left to fester. Eventually, that pain becomes too much for the person to hold, and a poltergeist is born, bringing with it a terrifying display of what was hidden. You have pulled the haunted card because there is something you must atone for. You've locked something away, choosing to ignore it rather than own up to your own mistake or feelings. This can be something you have done to someone else, but also something you maybe feel you have done to yourself. Perhaps a choice you'd like to forget, or even a trauma that you haven't dealt with. Whatever your situation, know that your hauntings will continue until you are ready to face the monster your pain has created. This is especially true if you have if you've also pulled other cards, which we didn't do.
I was like, I wonder what this is in context to.
Yeah. I think haunted, this card to me is an invitation to reevaluate.
Yeah.
To reevaluate how you are showing up in the world right now, how you intend to continue showing up in the world. Take stock of these last couple of weeks. What's worked for you? What hasn't? Recalibrate. Leave it behind. Because the revolution needs you next year, baby. I love you. We're going to be fine. We can face our shadows. We need to face our shadows.
This episode is brought to you by Thinning of the Veil Apothecary. Founded by your plant-loving co-host, Thinning of the Veil Apothecary, or Tova as we lovingly refer to her, is an apothecary made by a witch for witches. In addition to offering handcrafted herbal products, potions, and elixirs lovingly made with organic, homegrown, and ethically wildcrafted herbs, Tova also offers a wide range of services. If you are seeking support in dipping your toe into the world of building relationships with the plants in your own wellness, be sure to check out the one-on-one herbal consultations offered on a sliding scale. Additionally, for any budding green witches out there who want to deepen their connection to the plants and learn together in a supportive community, we encourage you to join the monthly Herbal Wisdom Coven, where we gather with one plant ally a month in a circle of fellow witches and magical folks. As a little treat for this amazing podcast community, we are offering 10% off your order when purchasing apothecary items when you use the code OBMM at checkout. Again, that code is OBMM for 10% off at checkout. And thank you, incredible listeners, for your support.
Also,
Okay.
I feel like the haunted card is apropos for this episode because we have a spooky-ish topic, not like paranormal spooky, but in the realm of spooky things, I feel like. And I've heard Sterling speak about this too, but I also agree with it that I feel like the deep winter, which we're like really getting into following Yule, is a spooky time of the year. It's just the true dark half of the year, right? Like it's dark by 4 p.m., at least here in Colorado, where we still have stupid daylight savings time for unknown reasons.
Sucks to suck.
Well, to be fair, the Colorado legislature did pass it and say we're going to stop this shit, but now we're beholden to the feds for God knows why. Because for some reason, so many other things can be up to states, but apparently not daylight savings.
Not daylight fucking savings.
So that's my rant for the day, and I'll leave it at that. But one of the things that Shine and I have been excited to talk about and explore is the concept of spirit flight. So that's what we're going to get into today.
I'm so excited. What is it?
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar, spirit flight, it has a lot of, I would say, like shamanistic tendencies and like in the realm of the shamanism vein. I do want to pause for a quick second before we get into like the depth of this conversation and acknowledge that shamanism as a word has been stolen for the most part, and that it really does belong to the Manchurian tribe in Siberia. But unfortunately, and people really should get on this, there just isn't a word to describe the same types of like activities or actions, I guess, that shamanism entails in modern language. So instead of like doing the work and finding a new word, we just keep taking from other people, I guess.
We keep
So
using it and then issuing apologies. How very colonizer of us.
interesting. Yeah. So just wanted
If you
to
want to have these conversations in more detail, you want to be in the book coven and the weekly working challenge. We are girlies
100%.
who have to protect their professional lives as well. So come
Right.
hang out.
100%. But yeah, so I just wanted to make space for that and acknowledge that is the elephant in the room when we talk about things like shamanic journeys or spirit flight, or I like to call them like ritual journeys or whatever that looks like for you. So I will say that while things like spirit flight are really rooted in kind of the trad witch path, or like what has become the traditional witchery path, in that it was something that was practiced a lot in like European witchcraft, but it is something that exists all over the world where people in different cultures have this ability to kind of disconnect their spiritual self, right, and be able to pass into the other side or other realms. And the reason I bring up traditional witchery in particular is because it's really fascinating when you look at where the roots of the Tradwitch path comes from, because it's really rooted in things like folklore, right? But also what it is, it's like this kind of reconstruction of what we've seen in like witch trials, right? And these types of court documents where most often women, it wasn't always women, we know that, but and it was largely marginalized communities, would be coerced into, I guess, like, what's the word I'm thinking of? Confessing to certain acts, right? And one of the things that was so prominent in a lot of witch trial evidence is the idea that there would be like spectral images of a woman, right? Leaving her body and being able to like move through the night. Or we think about the idea of a witch flying on a broom, which has like interestingly been I love your kitty, which is like interestingly what we most associate like the, kind of pop culture idea of what a witch is, right? But that's really like symbolism and imagery for spirit flight, and the idea that the witch does have the ability to move between worlds, and we must have the tools to make that available to us.
Let's talk about tools.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've gotten really into in the last year or so, especially working with plants in the way that I like to, is spirit flight is also very commonly associated with the idea of flying ointments. And if you're not familiar with the flying ointments was that back in the day, these salves would be made from poisonous plants. And not in the sense of like wanting to poison somebody or poison themselves, but more so to put us in this trance-like state so that we were more easily able to like access other realms or access messages from deities or whatever. And so it was believed that a witch would slather themselves in this oil and then go into that trance-like state. Where the idea of the broom comes into play, and there's a lot of different like modes of thought on this as to whether or not this was actually the truth, but I also think it's deeply rooted in gross misogynistic patriarchy. That's the fence that I'm on.
Yes.
But it was believed that, like they would slather up the broomstick with this oil and that's what would give them the ability to fly, right? I just think that's patriarchy being gross and misogynistic and wanting to over sexualize something that has no reason to be over sexualized. And at that point in time in history that we're talking about, brooms were largely associated with tending the hearth and being in the home and being the keeper of your household, right? Which was predominantly a woman's role at that time.
Yeah.
So why not marry the two together and make it gross?
Why not? But we can go ahead and reclaim it.
We can.
How
So
are we
one thing,
how are we doing that?
there's a couple different things. So a lot of the time brooms are still utilized in spirit flight practices, but instead of it being something that you like fly on through the night, it can be something that you can envision yourself crossing over. So another element of spirit flight that is really commonly utilized is the idea of seeing yourself crossing over a hedge or jumping over a hedge. And that's pretty common in traditional witchcraft. Some people might see themselves actually like physically seeing their spiritual self removed from their body. Or, some people might use shamanistic drumming to be able to bring themselves into a trance state. But I love the idea of thinking of a hedge because I love the idea of the witch being somebody who lives on the fringes of community, right? And you're on the side of wildness where the hedge meets modernity or the hedge meets civilization, right? So by being in that act of jumping over the hedge, you are now in the wildness, you're in the unknown, you're in the mysterious. And so a broom can be utilized in that same way where you can visualize yourself hopping over the hedge using the broom, or you can have it next to you if you have like a very special like bosom tool that you use in your workings. Like if you're doing like spiritual cleansing around the house or whatever, it can also be a tool that is just laid beside you as you lay in trance state. Um, so I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself too, in that to clarify like what spirit flight truly is the idea of it's similar to also things like astral projection, right? Some people may be familiar with that, but it's the idea of being able to access another realm, usually the other side, through the act of moving into a trance state or, allowing your spiritual self to move beyond this realm. So, yeah.
This is so interesting and also just so funny how like pop culture does things to your brain, because the other side just makes me think of like upside down Stranger Things now.
Oh, yeah.
And
So many people say that that is like a common thing that they actually experience. Like they feel like somebody who was on that show actually experienced shamanic journeys or spirit flight.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
And there are just so many different can you tell me, I need some practical tips for getting out of this timeline, please. What are some things people need to keep in mind regarding some of those tools, i.e. maybe plants and allies that might help you get there, like health disclaimer wise, etc.
Yeah, that's a great point. So while unfortunately I don't think spirit flights allows you to completely leave this timeline or
You
this
can't quite
realm,
check out.
your physical body stays here, unfortunately. But it is something that folks should take some preparation to do. It shouldn't be something that you necessarily just jump into, right? And I'm not saying that you have to do like these big elaborate rituals to be able to engage in spirit flight, but you should have a good protection practice about you because you are, while you're leaving your physical body in this plane, you are allowing that kind of spiritual soul aspect of you to move somewhere else. And so I actually, Celeste Larson, who goes by Mage by Moonlight on Instagram, has a really great course on spirit flight as well. And one of the things that I really love that she spoke to is just like anything else, you should, to avoid to the best of your ability, right? Like to make sure that you're being safe in the world, you should make yourself a difficult target, right? So having your whereabouts about you, paying attention to what's going on. So plants can be really supportive if you have allies that are protective for you, like nettle or rose, you know, these kind of allies that tend to show up in that space anyway. But also, you know, having a good grounding practice. So before you go in, making sure that you're tethered here, and that you can even visualize like a rope between you and your spirit body, making sure that you have a way to go home. Or when you visualize yourself, because this is largely a visualization practice, I will say. But also I do want to, because I know people are probably like, oh, but if I'm not good at visualization, can I do
Yeah, I
this?
wanted to ask you about that because isn't that
Yeah.
something that you've struggled with?
I will say it's been something that makes my visualization practice stronger,
Mm,
actually. So I do
okay.
think it's something that can be continued to develop. And it's also a practice that uses a lot of your other senses. Because, like, you want
Mm,
to, when you're exploring the other world, you want to think about what am I smelling? What am I feeling? What's going on in this space, you know, and what makes it kind of different from the realm that I'm in. So it's a very kind of like sensory experience all around.
mhm,
But one of the things that you can do is like really just as you're thinking about your path into the other world, whatever that looks like for you, you know, you're often encouraged to visualize a gateway of some kind,
mm,
whether it's just like you might see kind of like a hazy fog, you know, as a veil, more or less, between this world and the next. And if you pass through that, or if you open a physical door, you know, or if you follow a pathway, just making sure that whatever way you go in, you also follow those same steps back out. So that can help you to make sure that you're staying safe in that way and not getting lost. Not that
mm,
it's like super easy to get lost, but that sort of thing. Or if you work with particular spirit guides or familiar spirits, this actually can be a way to like meet your familiar spirit, which is something that I've had experience with, which is really cool too. Or if you want to meet a deity or ancestor work, like spirit flight can be used in so many different ways other than just kind of like taking a trip to the other side and just checking out what's there.
yeah. Oh, I love this. I'd love to hear more to the extent that you're willing to share about your experience with your familiar. I feel like that's the kind of that feels like a really accessible entry point for a lot of
Mhm.
people, like kind of a safer way maybe to approach it without somebody as a tether, like somebody with
Totally.
you and helping you. And then I also, this is a sidebar related, unrelated, but I will link a When Walls Can Talk episode in the show notes of this as well about kind of the other darker side of this things like the elevator game,
Right. Yes.
etc. But different conversation. That's not the kind of vibe we're setting here. But I think if you're interested in this, that's also a really good listen. So I'm gonna pop that one in the show notes as
I
well.
think that's such a good point to make, though, is that Spirit Flight, I feel like, is different from like playing those types of games while there's like
Mhm.
similar elements to it. Like Spirit Flight is something you do with intention. Like intention really matters, just like with
Yeah.
anything magical workings or kind of like ritual journeys or whatever. Like it's just important that you set that intention before you go.
Mhm.
So if like you want to meet a familiar spirit, you make that clear.
Yeah.
And it's funny because meeting my familiar spirit was something that was very recent. It was something that I just did as my intention for Samhain this year. It's
Oh, I
something I've
love
been wanting
that.
to do ever since we had our familiars episode, right? Because like in that episode, we kind of distinguished that while you have your soul pets, like a familiar is really kind of more in the spiritual plane. And something else that's really amazing about spirit flight, and actually is kind of proven by science, is because you go into these trance states, right? And you're moving into these like theta waves of your brain. And so you're in these like deep meditative states. It's actually been proven that like healing happens better when you're in those types of states. And so
Yeah.
same kind of thing, like when you are doing spirit flight, you can have the intention of like, hey, I'm wanting to help heal something in my life, or I want to engage in shadow work more intimately, or maybe there's like a working that you're trying to do that just isn't like quite hitting the mark in this plane, but you know, in the other side might be reinforced by the elements that make sense there, right? Because they're a little different than what we see in our like physical reality.
Yeah.
So what's been so cool about my familiar experience is I went into the spirit flight with that intention. But there's not a whole lot of difference between like a shamanic journey and spirit flight, in my opinions. Other people might feel differently. So as part of my herbal training, I've done a lot of that where I
Mm.
go into meditation with the intention of connecting to the actual spirit of
Of the
plants
plant.
versus just like
Yeah.
the physical reality of them. And so a lot of the times you may have this experience where you like are in a different world to make that happen, or you meet the actual presence,
So
physical
cool.
presence of the plant, right?
Hmm.
And I've had different journeys that I've done with different intentions, but there would always be this fox that would show up in those journeys. And I
Yeah.
always just thought it was like, oh, maybe this is just like a helpful ally that I'm coming to know. Or I always saw it as like, oh, maybe I'm experiencing like the spirit of fox energy, you know, like similar to like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm meeting nettles energy or spirit, you know? And so I didn't think anything of it. And I always saw them as like kind of like a safe ally that like would help guide me certain places in the other side. And that's another thing that I'll add as like a little tip that I have also learned in working with like Eulithero and like ancestor veneration, is like it's nice to have somebody on the other side that can be kind of a guide, for two reasons. One, obviously, like the protective energy element of it. And then two, because they can help you get places faster. It's like efficiency, right? So, like when I'm wanting to meet an ancestor guide, unfortunately, in a lineage where I descend from European colonizers for the most part, you have to go back a long ass ways to meet like a well ancestor, right? Like it could be
Yeah.
like Neolithic times. And if you're trying to like, while time and space is weird and moves, it's like hard to describe, to get to that ancestor can take a while. Right? And so
Yeah.
like I would work with plant spirits or spirits like this one to be like, help me get there faster, help me move through these like timelines more quickly so that I'm not like
Yeah.
wasting time with ancestors who are maybe not well yet, or are like still in kind of that evolving state, so that we can do the work that we need to do in our lineage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so long story short, meeting this familiar, I had the intention to meet them, and they showed up in this space. And I realized like, oh, you've been here all along. Like you've
Yeah.
been here in other journeys and I didn't realize it. And what's so funny is like you can sit there and have a conversation too, right? Of like, okay, like tell me about you. Like, and it's the beautiful thing about like a familiar relationship too. And shout out to what's his name? Keldon, who wrote The Crooked Path. There's a lot of
Mm.
really great information in that book on spirit flight and familiars and all of that. But they point out too that like building a relationship with a familiar spirit is like anything else. Like it requires a lot of consent and like relationship building and like having intention behind maintaining that relationship. So I think when you first meet a familiar spirit, even though you have that intention and maybe they've been there all along, you should get to know them, right? And so like I was kind of sitting there having a conversation with this familiar spirit, and I was like, "Well, tell me your name." And he said it was Todd, which I was just like, "Okay, is that like a little tongue in cheek? Like, come on." And he's like, "No, I want to be called Todd." Like deadpan, no fucks given, like dead serious.
Hey.
And I was like, "Oh, okay. So there's that." But I had to giggle, and like The Fox and the Hound as a movie was something I was always like so connected to. As one of my most like earliest
Yeah.
memories of like childhood movies was that one, and like loving that movie. So it just makes you wonder in all of these realms how they're interconnected, and like how some of these spirits have really
Yeah.
been with us longer than we've ever realized, you know?
Yeah. Uh, I love that. And just the different ways, yeah, the different ways spirit shows up when you start paying attention and when
Hmm.
you start building those relationships and learning what those signs are is just really quite fun.
It is. And it's like so comforting to realize that we really truly are never alone. Like
Oh,
there's
yeah.
a team behind us always that are going to be there whether or not we ever choose to engage with them. Like obviously if you do, you're going to have such a stronger like relationship and like be more spiritually attuned and all of those things, but it's just so nice to know that like there's something out there supporting you in the
Yeah.
ethers somewhere.
Mm, yeah. So what herbal allies helped you get there? What
Yeah.
who helped shortcut you?
So one of them, I'm actually drinking one of them tonight, but I really started deepening into this through my final project for my herbal apprenticeship. But what's interesting is like this plant that came forward is Eleuthero, which is like
Mhm.
not typically a plant that I would say is like in my lineage. It comes from Siberia, or I think it's often used in like traditional Chinese medicine, and it's like,
Mhm.
you know, kind of that part of the world. But it was one of the plants that we were working with that month, and like I had gotten the idea of like my final project is I want to connect with my well ancestors and like learn through, you know, shamanic journeying and spirit flight like how to heal the wounds of our lineage, right?
Yeah.
And um when I was doing meditation with Eleuthero, just to kind of get to know them better as a plant and like build that relationship, they just like popped up and were like, I'm doing your final project with you. Like, I am the ally
I
that you're
love
meant to
that.
work with. And it was some of the most like incredible like plant meditations that I've had. And it's like interesting because they were the ones that kind of showed me like, hey, the plants have always known this. We've always known how to do this work because we've always existed in both worlds. Like
Yeah.
humans, right? We've
Mm,
had this ability to forget how
yeah.
to be in both worlds where plants have never had that. They've always existed. And and if you think about it, like they have an understanding of the underworld and the
Yeah.
modern world, you know, right? Like they're always in both places at once, which I think is just like such a
Yeah,
profound
plants
teaching.
literally are just as above, so below,
They
aren't
literally
they?
are, like
Oh,
in any capacity. And that's just what makes them so incredible. And so, like, sharing with me that kind of imagery. And then Eulithero also showed me, like, kind of the idea of how time and space moves in context of like working with ancestors, which I think is what a lot of people are going to be really interested in when it comes to spirit flight.
mhm.
Um, but they showed me like kind of a tethered rope, right? And like if you think about the ends of a rope and as it continues to stretch, it starts to fray, right? And it was like showing me that the ends of the rope are like where I am in this modern context of time and space in this present moment and where my well ancestor is that I'm trying to reach, right? And because scientifically space like moves right in this infinite expansion, so it's like it was giving me like this like science lesson while also like these profound spiritual teachings at the same time in like a 30-minute meditation where I'm like, how do I continue on after this? Like this is so much. But they showed me like it continues to expand, and until we start to tend to that relationship and tend to the fraying rope, it'll continue to separate and we get farther and
Mm,
farther and farther apart. But by working with the plants or be engaging in the spirit flight or tending your ancestral altar where you're acknowledging them in the midst of time and space in this current moment, it helps repair that bond.
mm,
So yeah, Eulithero has been such an ally in this work. But something that I think I've talked about in previous episodes too is like that can be part of this is like maybe you want to connect with a plant cester ally or like a plant spirit familiar or something like that, and you can
mhm.
start this journey yourself, you know, like obviously having that grounding centering practice, making sure you're protected and that kind of thing. But I also like I think a lot of people, and I was this way too, like you get a lot of fear around the idea of spirit flight because it feels so like untangible and like there is a
Mm,
lot of unknown, and that's also kind of the beauty of it is that it's a little bit mysterious, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's something that we should necessarily fear. And again, like if you do a good job of like your protective work, just like anything, if you do spirit communication,
Yeah.
we've talked about how important that is. And if you have good intentions going in and you make yourself a difficult target, you know, I think it can be a really incredible experience.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting parallel to just existing in our physical world too,
Yeah.
of how important those practices are in general, but also how like what you give truly is kind of what you get back, like that
Yeah,
energy
100%.
recycling, but also in that sense of I've really been struggling with this idea that maybe not struggling. I think I've accepted the idea that maybe uh humans are not baseline good. Um, you can debate me on it. I get it. It's fine. Cats, this one, baseline good. Humans, maybe baseline like neutral at best. But
Yeah, that's an
that can
interesting
also be
thought.
really preventative as far as, connecting with people and finding our shared humanity. Like
Yeah.
remembering that is important. But somehow it just feels a little bit more accessible to me in the other realm than it does right now.
And that was like the thought I was having as you were saying that about like humans being baseline good is like I do believe inherently we have created cultures and systems that have shifted our baseline, right? Where
Yes.
the laws of like the laws, I say very loosely. And again, I'm still very new to spirit flight, so please don't take this as like gospel, anybody who's listening. But the laws of the other side are just so different. Like the things that
Yeah.
we pay so much attention to in this human constructed modern reality that we're in are so often meaningless over there, where they're like,
Yeah.
why are you even spending your time,
Like caring.
engaged in
Yeah.
these types of things? Why are we not engaged in things that help us expand our intellect or help us to remember what it means to be in community or, like see the bigger universe for what it is? Like, that's, I think, one of the coolest things about spirit flight is realizing that there's so much more than what we've ever known was here. We just get so
Yeah.
stuck in this like physical reality,
Yeah. What would be maybe a good way to kind of start dipping your toes in the water? Like building a foundational meditative practice?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I
Like
would say
what's like the ladder, you know?
sure. I think it, that's a really good question. I definitely think having a good meditative practice is helpful. But I'm not going to say that that's like the best thing because even I struggle with like having like a
Mhm.
regular meditation practice. But like maybe just starting with a thing. So like maybe you want to meet a plant
Mm.
spirit or even if like the spirit of a stone or
What
a
about
beautiful
like your higher
practice.
self? Is that
Yeah, or your higher
accessible
self. I think
spirit
that's the
flight
way
wise?
actually Celeste starts her program is like learning your own personal place of power is what
Okay.
she calls it.
I like that.
Or like Asia Suler one time also shared like meeting a tree that is meaningful to you in
Mm.
your neighborhood, right? You don't have to necessarily physically leave your home, which we
Yeah.
often encourage people to do, right? Like go sit with that tree. But maybe you can even just be like, instead of like going to the other side, you journey, which is what witches do, right? And they would move through the night. You can journey to that tree in your neighborhood and connect with the spirit of that tree versus even like leaving this realm, quote unquote, necessarily, if that's feeling like a little inaccessible at this point.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I have so many favorite trees
I know.
and so many favorite bushes. I
And
tell
it's
plants
somebody
I
like
love them all
you,
the time. If I think you're cute, you know it,
right?
no
And
matter
somebody
what you
like you
are.
who's like moved away, right?
Hmm.
And maybe there's a tree that you miss from here in Colorado, like you have the ability to like travel back to them and connect with them
Oh,
or
that's cute.
childhood friends as well.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
how fun. This
I
is really
can nerd
cool.
out about spirit flight like all day long. I've just found it to be so fascinating. It's become such an integral part of my practice as an
Yeah.
herbalist, as a witch, as a folk practitioner, like all of the things. Like it just is so profound, I feel like. And it's just such a way to like access information that we just wouldn't have access to otherwise. You know, you can't have
Mhm.
everything like in a book or Google or anything like that. You get to learn directly from the plants themselves or directly from the stones or whatever.
Yeah. How do you, as somebody who's been kind of deepening this practice and really, like, really immersing yourself in, like, with your certification and your program, like, you've very much been like living this all the time. Um, what does it feel like? Like, what is your first experience to now? Like, having it be a regular part of your practice.
Oh, that's a good
Like,
question.
what does that feel like to you now? Do you like, what would you tell Shale when she was first starting out?
Yeah, I think that the thing that's like coming to my mind first and foremost is like learning to trust your intuition, which I
Yeah.
feel like comes through like when you're on this path, that's always like the rub, right? Like you're always like, am I making this shit up? The bullshit question that
Yeah.
Sterling
What,
asks,
like,
right?
how is your discernment? Like, are you
Yeah.
good at that? Do you trust
hmm
yourself and do you trust your judgment enough?
Yeah. And I think what's been helpful from like the beginning, where I do think it's easier to be like, oh, this is probably your imagination at play
Mhm.
when you're first kind of figuring this out. But there would be things like that experience I was just describing with Eulithero. I wouldn't have like downloaded that or made that up in my mind, that specific imagery or the idea of understanding plants being in both worlds all of the time. Like sometimes you're
Mhm.
like, that's just not my voice. And I wouldn't have
Yeah.
come to those conclusions necessarily on my own. And that's where you can kind of start discerning like what's maybe my imagination, and some of it will be like your brain in spirit flight, right, is processing things in a way that you would understand because you're in
Mhm.
this like deep meditative state. And my experience in spirit flight is going to be different from somebody else's because I've had different life experiences. And so the imagery that might come to my mind or like the other world that I see might be very different from somebody else who has a different way of understanding the world.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I think it comes down to like really trying to hone your intuition. And I think that's always like the evolving thing as you get
Yeah.
better and better at that.
Because seance is also a form of spirit flight,
Totally.
right? So
Totally.
I'm just thinking of like my experiences. My experiences with seance lately have been solo, most of them.
hmm
And I guess that would technically just be like spirit flight conversations with my guides and ancestors and the people I'm with. But I very often, and I know people how people, if you struggle with visualization, sometimes like free writing
Totally.
is really helpful. It's not helpful for me as an actual writer because I will start to like edit my ancestors, which is just not helpful.
That's actually really funny. I can see like your ancestors be like, Cheyenne, just let
Yeah,
it
I'm bad
be.
at it. I don't they don't get through to me because then I just start making up things. I just start telling stories instead. But I um with the guides that I work with all the time, I do very clearly hear them, but not in the sense of like full complete sentences, which it probably looks absolutely bananas insane when I'm like sitting in front of the fireplace just talking to myself because I'll talk out loud and I'll talk to everyone. Um and you'll just get hit with like these feelings that are not yours.
Yeah, right.
Like that's a big discernment thing for me as someone who experiences spirit very physically.
hmm
And I often will find myself like answering questions or responding to things that my brain hasn't even fully processed was like asked in the moment
Right.
yet either. And so it's just, yeah, it's just such an interesting, um, I wanna try going further back along the frayed rope to find some of those well ancestors. I like that. It also gave me that that the visualization of like the tesseract, like the wrinkle in time
Yeah.
when it's frayed and frayed and frayed until you start to bond it and then you realize that like you're holding the points that you can physically move back together. This was a very visual demonstration, podcast land, but hopefully that was helpful.
Totally. Yeah. And one thing I do want to say too is like if you're curious about this, like it's hard to not also be curious about things like flying ointments or like how poison plants were incorporated into this. And we didn't get into that a whole lot tonight, and maybe we can in a future episode, because I could absolutely nerd out on like poison plants and flying ointments for sure. And matter of fact, maybe Tova might have her own special line of them coming to a online retail space near you.
Hell yes, witches.
But
Orgasms are resistance.
yes, that's not quite the way that the Tova ones will be used, but I mean, maybe I could think through that actually. Maybe we'll have a specialized product that comes out of this.
We'll do a Tova Lidiox library collab.
Yeah. Ooh,
Your
I'm into
one-handed-
that actually.
Your one-handed sacred read.
I'm actually super into this.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, we should make
All
that
right, we'll
happen.
talk about it.
Anyway, if you're curious about like working with poison plants, like one way that's really safe to do it versus like there are like flying ointments made with poison plants available out on the interwebs. Make sure if you do try to pick one of those up, you do it from a very reputable source, from somebody who is a practitioner in working with
herbalist.
Right. Herbalist, and particularly specializes in poison plants. But flower essences can be a really great way to do that, because spirit flight is so energetic, right? And so it's like a way of like tapping into vibrational medicine without actually working with like the physical plant material and potentially ingesting something that's toxic, where you don't really know where it came from or like how much dosage wise is in there. So yeah, that would be a recommendation of mine as well.
Caution, always, we are not medical professionals. I just write for them.
Right.
Okay, what per witch and slit do we have from the plants, from the universe, from the spirits?
I'm feeling like if you're drawn or curious about something like this, spirit flight, or something that you want to like dabble into, with good intention, right? Like don't be like stealing from other people's cultures or anything like that.
Swiper, no swiping.
Right. But if you are curious and you want to expand your practice, like go for it. Like we're only going to learn and grow by doing things. And if we keep ourselves held in this space of fear, it prevents us from being able to like advance our practice.
Yes.
Did we circle back to the card? Nice.
Release it. Haunted. Can you hear that? You might not be able to because Zoom does dumb things, but I was giving you good ASMR. Yeah, let it go. Release it. Seal those frayed knots, baby.
Honestly, if you told baby Shale and Cheyenne that we would be doing things like seances by ourselves and spirit flight,
my God, now I only want to do seances by myself. I hate doing seances with other people now. I'm like, I only want to talk to my family. Sorry.
But we were like the scaredy cattest little like girlies ever. They would think we're so cool knowing that we do this. Cool. So evolution is possible, friends.
Yes. Keep living for your 13-year-old self, because that's how you know you're doing it right.
And this is the perfect time of year to be doing things like spirit flight, because it's the dark half of the year and we're turning inward anyway. So why not?
One final kitten moment.
She's so cute. Hi, Matilda. Thanks for joining us.
She's so cute. You'll be seeing plenty more of her. She's not familiar. Her and Telluride have 2 brain cells to rub together.
Cheers to that, witches.
All my marshmallows are at the bottom of this.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Ouija Boards and Midnight Margs. If you had a witch and good time, we hope that you will help us to grow this little internet coven. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a review so you can let us know what you're drinking tonight. As a thank you for helping us to get in good graces with the algorithm gods and helping us get seen in our community to grow, we give all who write a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify a 1-card mini reading. Want more mischief from your hosts? Follow Ouija Boards and Midnight Margs on Instagram and TikTok. We are also now streaming Season 6 on YouTube, where you can watch the podcast via video. We thank you for sharing your magic with us. Cheers, witches!